What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And finally, after almost 3 weeks, we're finally getting to the Jeff Hardy episode of Broken Skull Sessions. Now, part of me is happy that I waited, because obviously a week ago from Thursday, we found out that Jeff Hardy was released by WWE. For a lot of this stuff, reportedly, for what he talked about on this podcast. Obviously, he wasn't released because of the podcast, obviously. What I'm referring to is that he talked a lot. And this podcast is a lot more relevant than it was 3 weeks ago. And I was already looking forward to it. I'm a big Jeff Hardy fan. But it's a lot more relevant now than it was when it initially came out on Thanksgiving. And that he says a lot on this episode about how, this is my last run. I'm in a great place right now. If I screw up again, I'm done. We'll talk all about that momentarily. But it turns out, obviously there was a different side to every story. I am more convinced now than I was 2 or 3 days ago that this was a misunderstanding and that Jeff Hardy is doing a lot better than we hope, or that we thought originally that he was. Because we found out a week ago that he was released by WWE, very likely stemming from the incident on that house show from War Games weekend from about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago almost at this point, where he looked weird in the ring and then he escaped through the crowd afterward and left through the crowd, and there was no indication, no confirmation that he was drunk or high or whatever, but not that that was the automatic assumption, but you thought something was up, and then he gets released. Come to find out that they offered him rehab, he said no. We come to find out from Matt, who obviously would know his side of the situation, because he's Jeff's brother, he speaks with him, whatever. His wife, Beth, I believe, had also said that he was okay. I'm just kind of giving this as a brief premise real quick before we get to the episode. But Matt had mentioned that he didn't really go into exact detail, but he basically said that WWE pretty much jumped the gun, jumped to conclusions in assuming that Jeff was not okay, even though he was, and Jeff denied rehab because he didn't think that he needed it because there was no problem. WWE apparently assumed there was a problem, probably seen the footage from the house show, and why wouldn't they? That was pretty bizarre behavior. Something must have been going on. Someone's not telling the truth here. Some piece of information is being omitted, and I'm sure we'll find out in due time from whether it be Jeff himself or someone else in the company, whatever. And they felt they had no decision but to react and let him go. So obviously, I think he had taken some sort of a drug test. Whether he was, drugged up or not, maybe, I don't know if you could test, days later whether he was intoxicated during the incident. I felt that was more likely than him being on drugs. If at all. I don't know. Could he go back? I guess. It might be more likely he just sits out the 90 days, goes to AEW instead, if he is indeed okay. Matt and Jeff could be making it sound like he's okay when he's not, and he actually has bigger problems. I take Matt at his word, though. Matt, being in a great place himself, has also gotten on Jeff for doing dumb things. In his own opinion, after reading the situation, doesn't sound like he thinks Jeff did anything wrong here. So it just makes this podcast a lot more interesting than it was when it initially dropped on Thanksgiving back on November 25th, 2021. Good episode, a little over an hour long, around an hour and 18 minutes. Shorter than the other ones. Jeff really isn't much of a talker. I had a chance to interview him myself, actually the weekend before this dropped, on the weekend of, Survivor Series, obviously. I was at a press junket in Brooklyn the day before the pay-per-view and had a chance to chat with Jeff myself. I don't have the footage from it currently, unfortunately. We got some still shots from him, but he was great. And, he also seemed to me like he was in a great place, a lot like he did here with Steve, and Steve always brings the best out of his guests on these shows. So I really wanted to get to this now and not wait any longer, because the new Broken Skull Sessions is dropping on Sunday with DDP, Diamond Dallas Page. Bit of a random guest. We haven't really gotten a legend on the show in a while, but I'm looking forward to that one, so I thought I would get this review out of the way before I get to that one next week at some point. But anyway, to start from the beginning here, he talks about how he had his first WWE match in 1994 working as an enhancement talent at the age of 16. All these years later, his body's still holding up. He feels very blessed. He stretches every morning to still be physically fit enough to go out there and wrestle. He's not, waking up, I'm sure, feeling no pain whatsoever, but, all things considered, he feels pretty good. He talks about always pushing his body to the limit and doing all these stunts and just crazy spots and stuff like that. He actually admits, and I never knew this, he almost went to an art school in Atlanta before he went into wrestling. He also talks about being into music and the music process, and doing his own designs in his yard, and we've seen that before with the final deletion stuff and those vignettes with Matt and Jeff back in his TNA days, and how he would always, cut his own yard. He would cut his own lawn and do his own design, and it looked awesome. And you would kind of see it from the aerial view from, what are those things called that you fly around? Whatever those things are called. He would kind of get it from that perspective, and it looks awesome. But yeah, creativity is really what keeps him going, he says. And it can be challenging. And he also talks wrestling in front of no fans last year, but he got through it. Talks about moving to SmackDown, calls it a blank canvas, and that he wants to do something different, and he plans to pitch said ideas to Vince. Now, obviously, he has since been released. I would have to assume, without him mentioning it here, those plans were for Willow. When I talked to Jeff a week before this dropped, he had said he really wants to do Willow. He has said that in every interview he has done for the last couple of months, that he wanted to do Willow in WWE. Never had the chance. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Willow wasn't my favorite thing in TNA, but it was worth the shot, I thought. In WWE, it would have been interesting, I think. But he talked about how Matt was more of the pitch guy. He never really pitched stuff to Vince himself, did Jeff. But he would always go to Michael Hayes. He was comfortable with Hayes. He came up with Hayes. He's got him into WWE many, many years ago, obviously. But yeah, so he would always pitch his stuff to Hayes, and he planned on doing that at some point, and he probably never got the chance before he got fired. He's never felt boxed in, he said. Never felt boxed in by WWE, because Austin asks him, have you ever felt creatively stifled? Not those exact words, but do you ever feel like you're so creative that WWE has kind of disallowed you from doing that? And he said no. And honestly, I take him at his word. Obviously, he's going to say that in working for the company at the time this was filmed. I don't ever feel like WWE has... The only thing they've probably denied him was doing Willow in the company, if he ever pitched that in the first place. Beyond that, I don't think they'd ever really disallow Jeff from being creative, because, he sells his own merchandise with his shit on it, with his art on it. He gets to go out there and paint his face. Beyond that first year when they first came back and he wasn't doing the face paint, and they were still just the Hardys, I can believe that they didn't want him to do it then, because they stole the demon and stuff like that. But in recent years, they've had no issue with him painting his face, because why the fuck not, And they want to give Jeff what he wants. They want to appease Jeff because he's super fucking over. So why wouldn't you give him what he wants? You know what I mean? And he talks about the face painting process and how the fans mean everything to him. And he also mentioned that if I screw up again, I'm done. Which, one, we don't know for a fact that he screwed up yet. I guess he was fired, but could they bring him back? Sure. Could he be done? No. Even if he did fuck up, would he be done? Probably not. I mean, wrestling might not be the best place for him if he's still in a bad place, but it doesn't sound like he is from what I have seen and from what I've heard. Even if he did fuck up, though, would the wrestling be the best place for him? Probably not. Would he continue to wrestle? Probably. Some promotion would take him. Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, going off of what he just said, he didn't want to mess up this last run of his, even though it kind of happened, because of his wife and daughters. Going back to getting into the company, he found out he got signed by WWE to a developmental deal while he was landscaping, actually. And that whole process, those first few years in the company went by real quickly, he said. As a teenager to then being in his 20s. He was very blessed to have Matt as his partner at that time because he did all the business side of things. Jeff wasn't really the business guy. Matt was, probably still is. He talks about learning a lot from the training in the Funkin' Dojo, which we saw all in, all about. We heard all about that in the, the Securing the Future episode of WWE Ruthless Aggression Season 2. I talked about it like a week or two ago. That was I think, if I'm not mistaken, the training facility they kind of set up in WWE for the guys like Rock and Edge and Christian and the Hardys and people like that in the late 90s before OVW came to be in the early 2000s. So he talks about how he used to wrestle in high school, like actual wrestling, I guess, which is cool. I didn't know that. And he actually didn't know he would wrestle again, actually, after wrestling Razor Ramon on WWE TV because it was such a rough match. He faced 1-2-3 Kid the next night, and it was kind of so on and so forth from there. He would call Chief Jay Strongbow. He was like his go-to contact to get booked in all these shows, I believe. And it was Vince Russo who pitched to the Hardys to have their attire changed. They had these very colorful attire. They look like goofs, though. He wanted to make them more serious and really, start wearing specific gear as they entered their real run in the company. So it was Russo's idea to have them change their attire to something else. I think the same attire that we would come to know them to wear all these years later. They kind of replay and show their new Brood entrance alongside Gangrel. They came out to the Hardy Boys music, which Maybe they did. I mean, Gangrel was doing his usual walk to the ring, so I thought maybe they dubbed over the Gangrel music or the Brood music with that one. Maybe they did come out to the Hardys music. I don't know. Loaded or whatever. They then replay the 1998 No Mercy Tag Team Ladder match for money. I think it was like $10,000, $100,000, whatever. And the invitational or the managerial services of Terry Runnels. It was the Hardys against Edge and Christian. And he talks a lot about how he was inspired by that Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon ladder match from WrestleMania 10. And that inspired him to do some wacky spots. And that's exactly what they did in that match. And then the Dudleys got involved. They talk about that and how the weapons and each team being associated with a certain weapon, whether it was the Hardys with the ladders, Edge and Christian with chairs, the Dudleys with tables, that was what led to the creation of the TLC match. And they rewatched the first TLC match at SummerSlam 2000. Excellent match. I mean, technically it was WrestleMania 2000, but that was the first ever triangle ladder match, a little bit different. The first official TLC match was SummerSlam 2000. They talk about his theme song and the loaded song and how it was just this basic custom commercial track that WWE used as a theme song for them. It would always get people pumped up for the Hardys. He also admits that his actual dream growing up initially was to play for the Atlanta Braves. I had no idea. Could you imagine Jeff Hardy as a baseball player? Because I couldn't. I could not. He just screams WWE wrestler rock star to me. He also wanted to go into pro motocross. That didn't work out. So then he entered wrestling. But he talks about handcuffing his earlobe to a ladder from Clash of Champions 2021, actually, just last year. And how weird of a spot that was. Because they talk about the ladder match while they're rewatching the one from SummerSlam 2000, so that's how they got on that subject. They also rewatched the second TLC match from WrestleMania 17, and they rewatched the specific spear, actually, with Edge spearing Jeff in the middle of the ring off the ladder, off the, where the belts are hung up, and you know the spot. It's a great spot. They relive it. Just an amazing spot. One of the greatest spots of all time. He talks about how Edge and Christian were the perfect enemies for the Hardy Boys at that point, and he calls them geniuses. They were very easy to work with. The Hardys were doing ladder stuff at home well before they joined WWE. They were already practicing with the crazy shit they could do after being inspired by the Razor and Shawn Michaels ladder match. So a lot of those spots I guess they were doing in the TLC matches were stuff they were already doing at home years earlier as kids, which is pretty funny. They talk about how each of them embarked off on their own in the early 2000s, and he talks about the Hardy Boys real quick. He says he doesn't know if the Hardy Boys will reunite and questions where it would be. Now, I thought that was an interesting line. Obviously, he got fired 2 weeks later. I don't think it was a conspiracy. I don't think Jeff did it on purpose to get out of his contract. That is absolutely ridiculous to assume that. Jeff seemed actually content there. Of all the people in that company that want out, he did not seem like he was one of them. He seemed genuinely happy to be there, and it just didn't work out. We don't know all the answers yet, but that's basically seemingly what happened. So anyway, it's interesting that he would say, I don't know where it would be. Like, why wouldn't you, if you're working for that company, why wouldn't you automatically assume that it would happen in WWE? So the fact that he said on air, and they kept it in, that he doesn't know if it would happen in WWE and it could happen somewhere else was very interesting. Because I didn't think Hardy would ever leave, would ever get fired or whatever, and that's exactly what happened. Very weird. They rewatched the Jeff Hardy-Undertaker match from Raw in 2002, the star-making performance from Hardy, and Hardy realized it was around that point that he could be a big star. But he failed his drug test in 2003, got fired after denying rehab, got fired actually by Jim Ross on the phone, he says. They talk real briefly about that TNA run from 2004 to 2006. Went there in 2004, got fired from there as well. They didn't even offer rehab. They just let him go because he was missing shows and doing other dumb stuff, so they just fucking fired him. He's always been his worst, his biggest, worst enemy, Jeff Hardy. So I guess he got clean or got better around 2006, and he went to Raw, I think either in his hometown or in Virginia. I don't remember. But he got WWE and TNA offers around that point. Chose WWE, chose to go back there, and that's where he was for the next couple of years. Now, he actually admits he didn't grow up doing drugs. He didn't start doing drugs and really experiment with stuff until he was 21, 22. Because growing up, his parents were so strict, specifically his mom. He was never doing that type of stuff. But he had a great first year back, and Johnny Ace even complimented him, saying, hey, you're doing a great job, man. And then he failed his first drug test. And the timing worked out terribly. He never really suffered from withdrawals, he said. never suffered from withdrawals from all this other stuff. And then they fast forward to the triple threat match, which the anniversary of was actually just this past Tuesday. The triple threat match from Armageddon 2008 WWE Championship, where he won the gold, and from Edge and Triple H in that great match. He had uncontrollable emotion, he said, upon winning that championship, and he knew he could be champ growing up, and he knew he would be able to achieve it if he just kept his mind on straight and his head on straight, and he did in 2008. It was a dream come true for him to face Matt at WrestleMania 25. They kind of talked about that match real quick, and he was upset to have their time cut, so they both went out there extra pissed, filled with, piss and vinegar, and just going out there frustrated and motivated and whatnot. And Matt's the best person to give a twist of fate to, he admits. Backtracking a little bit, they go back to the issues he was having in 2008 when he was removed from the 2008 WrestleMania 24 Money in the Bank ladder match that he was supposed to win. And Vince was very disappointed that he got himself suspended due to violating the wellness policy. He was out for 60 days. And he was supposed to win Money in the Bank. He got suspended right beforehand. It was a big fuck up. But he still battled back and won the championship, obviously, in 2008, and then a couple more times, 2 more times in 2009. So he left WWE in 2009, got busted for getting pills sent to him in the mail. I mean, it was serious enough where the SWAT team came in, and that was really where he was scared, and he thought his life was over because he saw his wife getting arrested on the floor, face first on the floor. Like, that's some pretty scary shit. It was rock bottom for him, he said. But he really started to turn his life around after he had his first daughter in 2010. They then talked real briefly about Victory Road 2011 and called it embarrassing. I mean, that's an understatement. And when Steve asks, "Oh, what were you thinking at that point?" he said, "Nothing. I wasn't thinking at all." But it was followed by, he says, one of the best wrestling years for him ever in 2012. Had a great year that year, and I agree. He really did have a great 2012. I think 2012 was a great, underrated year for Jeff Hardy. That was really his redemption year. He had some great matches. His story arc was great, culminated in him becoming TNA World Heavyweight Champion again for a number of months in 2012, beating Austin Aries in a really good match at Bound for Glory. But even beyond that, he was involved in the Bound for Glory series. I think he won the whole thing. Did he? I don't remember. I'm pretty sure he did. He and Bobby Roode had some good matches that year, among other people. I would really have to think about it. But yeah, no, he had a great year in 2012, did Jeff Hardy. But yeah, he thought TNA really could have been bigger at that point. He actually calls that match with Aries very, very good, and it was, in Phoenix. And as far as the differences between WWE and TNA at that point, he just said it was kind of the same, but WWE was just bigger than TNA, and he thought Bound for Glory was really like the launching pad for TNA. And that was a great show. 2012 was an amazing event, or an amazing year for TNA. And they just never really properly capitalized off that buzz. Like, they were selling out arenas and doing hot crowds. They were live on Thursdays. And then it was just kind of downhill from there for whatever reason. But yeah, they were doing some great stuff in 2012. Probably my favorite year in TNA history as far as the great stuff they were doing that year. He talked about the Broken Universe and how he loved it right away. I'm surprised they talked about this because this was Matt's idea. And this was more Matt's thing. But Jeff was involved in it, and Steve asks him about it. But yeah, he loved the Broken Universe stuff right away because it was so out of this world and crazy and creative in his mind. They talk about making the final deletion match with 6 people, including Jeremy Borash, and he's very proud of the end result of that. They talk about how the Boneyard match was basically inspired by Final Deletion. I mean, I'm surprised they said it out loud here and they just kind of spelled it out for people. But yeah, there would be no Boneyard match. I mean, not that Matt invented cinematic wrestling, but he really helped rejuvenate it and put it back on the map starting in 2016. And whether it was the Ultimate Deletion or whatever, he really did do a lot of cool stuff with that Broken Universe. But anyway, he actually admits here he wanted to have a penitentiary match with the Usos before Matt left WWE. Matt left and it didn't work out, but that was the match that he wanted, a Hardy Boys versus Usos match in a penitentiary, because they were like, oh yeah, the Uso penitentiary, which would have been very interesting, I think, very, very exciting, and it just never surfaced. They talk about how Final Deletion specifically was filmed overnight, and the subsequent ones took a couple days to film. Steve just brings up how Jeff is always over. He's just always over with the audience, and that leads them to talking about talking about how, the WrestleMania 33 return. I was there for it. I will never get tired of seeing that footage. The greatest wrestling moment I have ever witnessed in person, and I've seen quite a few. That still tops the list to this day. And the loudest pop I have ever heard, despite being in the last fucking row of that stadium that day in April of 2017. Just absolutely incredible. And yeah, they rewatched The Return. Still amazing all these years later. They talk about how it's, both of them in their opinions, one of the loudest pops of all time. And he calls the Expedition of Gold perfect. And it was. It really, really was perfect. I'm glad he said that. And it really is crazy when you think about it, because it'll never not be cool to me what they accomplished in that time period. Matt had this thing about an Expedition of Gold. They started when they were in TNA. Real quickly, I'll mention this. When they were in TNA doing the Broken Hardy stuff, they were doing something called the Expedition of Gold. They were going to various independent promotions, winning tag team titles. Various sets of tag team titles. The TNA tag team titles were the first ones. They won those titles at, I think, Bound for Glory 2016. They held them originally in early 2015, but Jeff Hardy got hurt, so they never really got a real run with them. But they got them back. They got the belts back at Bound for Glory 2016. They were the reigning defending champions for a while, up until actually they got fired. And in the meantime, while they were in TNA, TNA would air footage of them winning various sets of tag team titles in Mexico and all these other smaller independent promotions. The Crash, I think that was run by Conan. So anyway, they get fired from TNA. They get let go. I think their contracts were up and they just didn't renew. Whatever. I mean, that's a whole other story, obviously. They don't get into that here about why they didn't renew, but they leave TNA. And they were still the tag team champions at that point, so they had to just vacate them, I guess. But literally within days of leaving TNA, they went right to Ring of Honor and became the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champions by beating the Bucks for those belts at their Manhattan Mayhem show. A month later, they dropped the tag titles back to the Bucks at Supercard of Honor in 2017. The next day, returning to WWE and winning the Raw Tag Team titles at WrestleMania 33. It really was the perfect storyline that was never intended to do what it did. They held the three biggest set of tag team titles in the country at that point within the span of 30 days. That is unbelievable. As the end of the episode here, we talked about how we wanted the feud with Roman Reigns and have one more good run. Obviously, neither of those things happened because he got fired 2 weeks later. But he talks about his music and how he used to sell his artwork and he did really well and he hopes to do it again. I think he might, maybe he still does that. I don't know. He likes to motocross on occasion. He really fucked up his leg by motocrossing back in 2015. All the injuries started to pile up from there. But yeah, he likes to motocross every now and again. He actually built his daughter a zip line. We see footage of that, which was just fantastic. It was on his Instagram at one point. It might still be. But that's really cool. But yeah, he can't believe he's been wrestling for almost 30 years, and his struggles made him who he is today, and he enjoyed the final product. Even the stuff with Sheamus, he said, which I still think is in poor taste a year later. But the bar stuff and battling his alcoholism, which it doesn't sound like it's still a problem now, despite what we read last week. I still wouldn't have done that storyline, but, the bar fight was great, and they had some good matches. And he also tells people to this day, whether it be the kids themselves or adults or the adults of these parents, the parents, rather, of these kids, telling people to just be careful if they want to try his stunts. And he has no regrets regarding his career, or life probably just in general. So I very much enjoyed this. It was very eye-opening after what happened last week. He still seems like he's in a great place, even the videos that I've seen of him. But I hope it's genuine that he actually is in a good place and there was a misunderstanding, as opposed to him actually being fucked up. So it's disappointing that he even got fired. Maybe he'll go back. Who knows? But I'm a big Jeff Hardy fan. I just want to see the guy succeed, be happy, be healthy. Hopefully he still is, despite what happened, what's happened the last couple of weeks. But either way, check out this episode of Broken Skull Sessions. The timing of this could not be weirder. I mean, they probably filmed this in October, right after he got drafted to SmackDown, if not early November. And then he gets fired 2 weeks after it goes up. I mean, this could have gone up at any time. They could have put this up a year ago. Not saying they filmed it a year ago, but they could have filmed this and done it and put it up a year ago, 6 months ago, but it just so happened to be literally right as he got let go. Just wild, man. But check it out anyway. Not the most newsworthy one. A lot of stuff we've heard before. But if you're a Hardy fan like me, you'll enjoy it. It's time well spent. Thank you guys for checking out my review of this episode of Broken Skull Sessions right here on WWE Network and Chill. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. We got interviews going up all the time. We have reviews like this one, even though it's a couple weeks late. But we just reviewed the entire second season of Broken Skull Sessions, of Ruthless Aggression. So check out those episodes when you get a chance. Check out our Hawkeye reviews. Check out our movie reviews. Check out everything else that goes up here on the channel, from podcast excerpts to Q&As, live reactions, and so much more right for you fine folks on the channel. So check it out when you can. Have an awesome rest of your week. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.